Hello. I think the topic I'm going to talk about here is one that I have touched on before, but it's always worth reiterating. A month ago was International Men's Day, little less than a month ago, late November. And I think that's always a useful opportunity to sort of reflect on what it means to be a man in 2019. And this obviously varies somewhat from society to society. There's different cultural norms, there's different um, situations. I mean, for example, if I was a Maasai warrior in Kenya, I'd probably have a very different outlook or a very different expectation of what manhood means. In our society, where such concepts as masculinity and femininity are now sort of being scrutinized, partly because of culture wars, partly because of identity politics, partly because of a whole range of factors, then it is a bit more vague. Let me just say, for the record, I absolutely don't support rigid gender roles. It's like boys should be this, girls should be that. I definitely see that as being a problem. You know, that means to children who take an interest in something that isn't deemed to be part of their traditional gender role, you know, they can feel isolated, lonely. It can lead to bullying, etc. So I've not a problem with that sort of rigid mentality being challenged. I sometimes wonder, are we going too far in the other direction, whereby actually the the identity politics of the parents are kind of being imposed on the children. Now, there's a lot of things I can say around that, but for this video, I want to be specific about so-called toxic masculinity. I say so-called because I think the term is a bit contentious. And I think it's contentious because it's kind of a given that masculinity is a toxic thing. This tends to come from feminist circles, and they point to, for example, rape culture. They point to this mentality that some guys have that they are entitled to sex and issues around that. But I have a problem with masculinity being in itself deemed to be a bad thing. Um, I actually think when it comes to this, there is definitely a fault with a certain kind of male thinking, which I'm going to get into. That's definitely a big part of the problem. But the feminist notion that all masculinity is bad, the masculinity as a concept is bad, is also wrong. Um, and you know, people have this idea that if you're confronting or opposing that sort of rigidly enforced masculinity or the negativity surrounded by that, then it means you have to totally embrace non-masculinity. What I'm here to say is that actually there is such a thing as positive masculinity. It's not a case of two extremes. There is positive masculinity. Um, we're all human beings. We all have flaws, so there's no such thing as a perfect man, right? Even admired men had their flaws. Nelson Mandela, right? He's widely admired as a great leader, as a reconciliatory figure. And in fact, he was one of the people that was used in the International Men's Day campaign. Initially, when it was launched as a sort of a symbol of positive masculinity, and that's a good example. But Mandela had his faults. You know, he wasn't a great husband. He had his faults. He sometimes was a bit too rosy about certain other African dictators. I should say certain African dictators. And his administration didn't do enough to tackle HIV. But anyway, that's by the by. You know, this isn't about his record. I'm just making the point that even admired men had their flaws, and that's fine. We're all human beings. But when we talk about toxic masculinity, I definitely think there is some things to look at. One example that's kind of prominent in the news right now is the problem of racism that FIFA is dealing with, right? So this gets into the issue of football hooliganism, and I do see it directly linked to that. I take a very hardline view on this, which is consistent with my hardline views on crime in general. I think there should be zero tolerance. I don't think there should be negotiation. I don't think there should be compromise. I think if you're going to act like a lout, if you're going to hurl abuse at a player or an official or another fan because of the colour of their skin, you don't deserve to be there. Nobody should be made to feel that way in the 21st century. If you don't like what a player is doing, fine. That's a different thing. But when it is targeted at ethnicity, it's disgusting. We're now getting into the 2020s. That's a mentality that belongs in the 1930s, but unfortunately it's still widespread. So, how does this relate to toxic masculinity as a concept? Because there's this group mentality, this mob mentality that particularly football hooligans have, that when they're in a group, they can behave that way. They never ever do it when they're on their own. That's significant. So by definition, it makes them cards because they're hiding behind numbers. But it's kind of this, often alcohol's involved, but not always. It's this mentality that they think they're sort of in this, maybe they really do believe they're in a kind of comrade situation. Or me and the lads, we could do what we want. We're big, tough guys, you know? And that is a very, very dangerous thing. When you get a group of young men, sometimes not so young, this can go right into middle age. Um, and they may have had a few drinks, and they have the strength of numbers. They know that not many people can take them on. So they use that as a way to basically do what they want. This mentality is extremely dangerous because it means that the rest of us get caught in the way. So if you get a bunch of rampaging football hooligans outside a train station because they're angry that their team lost, in some cases even that their team won, they just want to gloat. I think in those sort of circumstances, the police should be given 100% support to do what is necessary to maintain control. And frankly, if that means getting batons out and, keeping these people in check, I'm all for that. Because when you get a group of angry young men rampaging in that way, that is a very dangerous situation. And because they believe they're invincible, only proportionate but heavy force will stop that. What I mean is truncheons. I mean strength of numbers with the police. I mean anything short of extreme brutality or lethal force that means getting the situation in control. I have to be totally honest, I hate football hooligans. I think they're scum. I really hate people like that. But then again, this ties into my whole life. I've hated gangs. I've hated anyone who kind of has this pack mentality and they attack an individual because they're in numbers. And yes, you do get some girl gangs, but mostly this is a male phenomenon. Mostly. I think girl gangs should be treated with the same contempt and get the same sentencing. I'm an equal opportunities justice advocate. But it's irrefutable that there is this mentality. And the thing is, individually, these guys would never do it. Most of the time, they won't. And it's a huge problem in football, but you also get it in boxing, unfortunately. Where I get it. A boxing environment is not going to be the same as Wimbledon. It is going to be a bit rough and tumble. You're going to get different clientele. It's going to be a different atmosphere, right? I get that. But there's a very big difference between enthusiastically supporting your fighter or your country and then degenerating into something else where you're hurling abuse at the opponent fighter or his national anthem, and in some cases even throwing stuff at that guy. I've seen that. Now, in my opinion, someone who throws things at an athlete in a sporting event should be given, if not a lifetime ban, a very, very, very long ban. That can cause real damage. And when a boxer trains to go into a fight, he is training to fight his opponent, not audience members that he can't even see where it's coming from. It's disgusting. It really, to be quite blunt about it, it enrages me seeing that sort of Neanderthal behaviour. And I think sports bodies, governing bodies, whether it be in football, as in FIFA, or boxing, the British Boxing Board of Control, because we have a particular problem in this country, they really, really need to prove that they're taking action. It's no good talking tough. They need to physically prove that they are punishing the people involved by banning them. In other words, if you cause trouble at a boxing event, I would support something like take their picture, take their fingerprints, to do whatever necessary to ensure that they cannot get access to another event because of the trouble they've caused. And boxers themselves who provoke those situations should be fined. But this is just an example of this mob mentality that people cannot just appreciate a sporting event, get into it, and be pleased or be disappointed without turning into mindless, degenerate yobs. It's just, it angers me, but it also scares me. It scares me because when you have that mentality, there's very little can stop it unless you have the right numbers of police or security. And it's unacceptable. It should be that way. Fortunately, it is. It's unacceptable that fighters need security protection as they go into a ring. I know why it's there, but it's just sad that it has to be that way because some degenerate idiots can't have self control. So, when it comes to toxic masculinity, I think this groupthink needs to be challenged. And I hate when it's dismissed as banter. This also applies to what is basically bullying because we often hear in that culture it's just banter. Now, I'm not a killjoy. I understand a group of young men celebrating something. They're going to have some laughs, right? I totally get that. I've been in that situation, right? Where me and a group of guys were messing around and maybe we done some drinking games. You get in that sort of situation. And I think it's harmless as long as it isn't hurting anyone else. But that is the important caveat. And you get this dynamic sometimes where a group of mates are constantly picking on the same person. And I think this is a problem in the armed forces. The notorious practice of hazing, for example. In this country, the top brass say that they are totally against it, but I suspect that there is still a problem. And I don't accept this argument, oh, well, you don't want snowflakes in the armed forces, you want tough people, therefore this sort of behaviour is fine. I get it. You want tough people, of course you do. That goes without saying. But when it is targeted at an individual, that isn't group building, that isn't character building. That is targeted bullying of an individual. And I personally, that disgusts me. And I think military top brass need to demonstrate a zero tolerance to that. Because to me, that doesn't make for a stronger soldier or sailor or airman. It's actually destroying the forces. It means that you're destroying someone who could be a very capable soldier or sailor or airman because of that sort of behavior. If it's collective, that's different because that's a collective thing, a tough training exercise. But when it's targeted at an individual, that's totally disgusting. And I think it needs to be purged out wherever there's evidence of it. So with toxic masculinity, the way men treat other men can sometimes be downright disgusting. And this has got nothing to do with feminists. I don't like third wave feminism. I don't like its double standards. It's just hypocrisy and it's male shaming. But this is an aspect that can't be refuted. The way certain men treat other guys is appalling. And I'm not talking about Oh, you don't like someone, you disagree with them, or even strongly disagree with them. I'm talking about this mindless, degenerate behavior of, for example, you're walking down the street and some wise guy with his mates thinks he's being smart, shouting something at you. My whole life I've hated people like that. Why can't they just leave other people alone? It's something that I know why they do it because it makes them feel strong in front of their mates, but I have nothing but contempt for such people because I look down on their cowardice. That's the fundamental issue for me. That is not manly, it's cowardly. And anyone who thinks that as being a man, they need to be robustly challenged. They need to be put in their place. Real men do not start shit for no reason. Real men do not treat people that way. They just don't. So I do believe in shaming those individuals. I do. Because it's the only way that they're liable to reflect on themselves. This softly, softly approach just doesn't work. They don't need to be understood. They don't need to be compromised with. They need to be shamed. Period. I mean, we talk about the biggest killer for young men in this country between men aged between 18 and 50 is suicide. And I think there's a lot of factors for that. But I do believe one of them is peer pressure from other men. One of them. I think feminist male shaming doesn't help. You know, it's barely a day goes by when you don't see an article in a newspaper written by a feminist reporter talking about how awful men are, about how men need to be shamed in these generic sentences. That is a pretty palpable issue as well. But when I say treat other men with respect, I'm not saying like everyone else. There's men in public life I deeply dislike, Jeremy Kyle, for example. So it's not a case of I'm not talking about socio-political issues, right? You could dislike someone, you could disagree with someone, but it's this degenerate mindset of just starting trouble with strangers for no reason. Just I've never understood it. I've never accepted it. I do understand it. It's about bigging themselves up with their mates, but I've never accepted it. Um, and I really think it comes down to self-respecting men to reject this. It's not about pandering to what feminists want, and it's not about pandering to what anyone else wants. It's just about being true to yourself. It's about being your best self. And if you're engaging in loutish behavior, you're not being your best self. Maybe you are. Maybe that's all you are. But you know, talking about women like bitches, the sort of language regarding women, that's not manly either. It's not locker room talk. It's not, and you don't need to be a feminist to see that. Respect for women to me doesn't mean virtue signaling. It doesn't mean always agreeing with women. It just means being a decent human being, not treating women like commodities in that sense. I'm talking about like, oh, she's gorgeous, you know, the aesthetic appeal. That's a different thing. I'm talking about, you know, when this is why I dislike rap culture because I think it fundamentally does degenerate masculinity into the gutter. Because what is rap culture? That sort of rap culture is about getting fast money, getting as many girlfriends as you can. I mean, someone like Floyd Mayweather is a very bad example of masculinity, right? He's a great fighter, possibly the greatest boxer ever. I think he's a strong claim to that. But his personality sucks. I mean, this guy, you know, he has women barely any clothes on with $100 bills. It's just, you don't need to be puritanical to say there's something just classless about that. It's just completely no class, you know? Um, and yeah, it's not, I'm not saying the women are victims, by the way, they're willing participants, but They're degrading themselves just as much. I just think that, it's about a fundamental respect, right? Not to be religious about it, not to be puritanical. It's just about decency. That is a good bit of masculinity to me, just human decency. Protecting people more vulnerable than yourself. Taking responsibility for your own mistakes. These are all things that I associate with masculinity. Physical courage helps, but I don't believe that. Oh, you can only be a man if you join the armed forces, or you're a boxer or something like that. I think you could be a decent man in many ways, but the way that I think we really need to reject the sort of laddish culture. I'm not talking about just having a good time with the lads. I'm talking about it's degenerate criminal behaviour, football hooliganism, just being mindless yobs. That to me is toxic masculinity, and I will support anyone who stands against that, including feminists. I'll even say, okay, I disagree with you in a lot of other areas, but I'm with you there because this affects everyone. When you have football louts rampaging outside a train station, young families maybe going past it. It just businesses trying to go about their business. It's something that should not be tolerated. So I do believe there is a problem with toxic masculinity, although I wouldn't term it that way. I call it negative masculinity or the negative side of masculinity. I don't like to say toxic masculinity because that implies that masculinity itself is a bad thing, and it isn't. There's such a thing as positive masculinity, treating women with respect, not picking on innocent guys, just being true to yourself as well, being your best self and being true to yourself. To me, that's a big part of it, actually. I probably haven't emphasized this enough. I think being true to yourself is definitely a mark of masculinity. Of course, a lot of this comes into just being a decent human being, so being a decent woman as well. I don't agree with the notion that it's all a grey area. I think men and women are different, and I think that there's nothing wrong with that. It should be celebrated. Anyway, I digress into another area. Let me know your thoughts.